Hello mate, and welcome back to another Let's Render. Doing a render for Deeper here, just going to redo some of the beginning scenes. It occurred to me that the opening scene where the characters are kind of living on the beach, I think a family in desperation, as law-abiding citizens as they might be, would probably at least try and break into something like a beach hut or something like that. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to locate them inside this beach hut. It's going to be a bit dark and dingy in there, but that doesn't necessarily make for a bad point in the case of this scene, because it's meant to be pretty dull and depressing anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the characters in here, and probably going to have one of them standing up purely so that we can have Sarah, the sister character, laying on the floor without worrying about there being enough space. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give Lucy here a sitting pose. So we're just going to go into poses, and I've actually cleared out my content library quite dramatically recently. I'm getting rid of a lot of poses that were just garbage. The purpose of that just being to try and make content load quicker. I realised that obviously over the years I've bought a lot of poses that weren't necessarily very good. Unfortunately, a lot of the packs that you can buy on the Dash Studio store maybe will have one good thing in them and the rest is just kind of filler. So that's what we're going to address here. I've got a lot of sitting poses, so just gonna take a minute and go through them all. The frustrating thing with Dash Studio is that if you have more in the smart content library, if you have more poses than then it can actually be shown in the first window. For example, I've got more than 1,200 sitting poses. It only shows you the first few, so you don't get to see the entirety. So browsing through your content isn't very easy unless you go through the content library, which of course is not necessarily that ideal. So we're going to try and find a pose that's not sexualized, that is just kind of a person sitting on the floor, not looking too flashy or too sexy, not trying to show off or anything like that, which is a bit of a challenge in Dash Studio if we're being honest. So let's just have a look at this one and see what happens. Give that a moment to load, and then we have to elevate her off the floor slightly, and as you can see there is a bit of a problem with the bum crack, but we can point that towards a wall, so it's not the end of the world. So let's just elevate her so that she's actually sitting on the floor of the cabin like so, and we can come right in and just double check that she's not poking through. Yeah, it seems to be okay. In fact, you could argue that she's too far off the floor. I don't know what's going on with this leg, so we're going to have to remedy that. But I don't really like these poses that are customized for a specific character, and these clothes don't necessarily fit too well with that. So I think having both legs bent is perhaps not going to work in this instance. So I'm going to keep on looking. And this one actually looks kind of good, because I think this will suit the mood of the scene a little bit better. We can actually lower her down now, get her so that she's actually clipping into the floor so that it looks like gravity is actually working on her. So thereabouts there, and then we can just zoom out again a little bit, and there you can see she's not looking too happy. In fact, being honest, that's probably a poor choice because it looks a little bit too far in the other direction there. So the search continues for an appropriate pose. So I've got them going from recent, so let's look at the older ones. Maybe some of the older ones will work. It really is. Finding custom-bought, pre-made poses, is always a bit of a challenge, because they're all generally made for a very specific character. And so finding one that looks good for the mood and also fits your character is not always the easiest thing to do, because as we've already discussed, the majority of poses in the Dash Studio store are very over-posed, over-dramatized, or over-sexualized. So it's not always an easy thing to find, but I think I'm probably going to hit on something in a moment. Yeah, I'm thinking this one might work, and then we can actually fix the knees afterwards. This is kind of halfway between the two poses that we had. There we go. We can fix the back hand being in the hair that's not going to be a problem at all. So we can actually slide her over more into the corner like so. Then we're going to just lift this foot by dropping the bend ever so slightly so that it doesn't sink into the floor quite as much. And then what I'm going to do with the character is I'm actually going to hide, not the whole right foot, from the metatarsals down, just to get rid of that poke through on the toes. And then obviously we've got a bit of an issue here with the pants, so let's see if we can fix that. Let's just go with action pants there, see if we can get something sorted there. There might be a leg bend morph. Let's see. Body fix, flat, fly out more, blah, 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 blah. Right leg. And we can hopefully find some kind of knees bent or something like that. Front down, knee up, knee back, knee float, knee up, blah, 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 blah. Let's see if we can get her pulled up. Oh no, that's a bit too far. We don't want that. Switch that back to 0. Something like sitting, perhaps. Fly open, blah, blah. These are quite a lot of poses we can get. Let's see if we can help her. Inflate, we can enlarge. JCM's control is off for some reason. Let's see if we get, there we go. Don't know why that was turned off. That's just, and then if we enable the body fix as well. There we go. So now we have, I don't know why the JCM controller was turned off. That's just crazy. JCM is joint controlled morphs. Basically, they're morphs that are enabled only when the joints of the body move. It prevents things like that from happening, basically. But you have to actually manually create. So when you create a clothing item in Dash Studio, you have to create the joint controlled morphs in order for them to actually have any. So it just goes to show that creating clothing items isn't just a simple case of creating geometry. So if we can do inflate as well, we can probably try and fix some of that poke through. There we go, that's better. Happy days. So this back arm, I'm actually going to look at where that elbow is. If that's resting on the knee, that's not the end of the world. Let's have a look. Let's give Dash Studio a moment to catch up. So if we were to go a little bit more front to back there, we can rest that actually on there. There we go. So that doesn't look too bad, to be fair. So now let's just have a look and see where she is in proximity to the floor. She's hovering above the floor ever so slightly. So we're going to have to drop her down. Select her in the seam. And then just change the Y translate a little bit more. You see all the mess that's going on around there where the skin's being stretched. And as you can see, this is actually, again, not a perfect morph for this character, because as you can see, it's still hovering off the floor. But that actually works to our advantage because we need her to sink in the floor ever so slightly anyway. So we're going to rest the palm of her hand on the floor, because that's how people rest on their hand on the floor when they're sitting in this position. And then we're going to have to fix the thumb ever so slightly. So we're just going to focus in on the thumb that we've got selected there. I'm actually going to select the joint above the thumb, and I'm just going to check up and down. There we go. So now her palms rested on the floor. Fingers are still off the floor though, so we're just going to increase the bend of those joints ever so slightly. It's a bit of a fiddly one. Let's just try going on the plus as soon as Dash Studio pulls its thumb out of its a-hole. There we go. And we can use the minus button there just to move in small 1 degree or 0.25 degree increments. That's good. And then we'll do the same thing for the middle finger, just until it's actually making contact with the floor, just there. And then those two, that's not too big of a concern because they're quite well hidden behind it. But these are the kind of adjustments that we have to make in our scenes to make sure that everything is spot on. That might seem like a really insignificant detail, but if you do a wide shot of what's going on inside the cabin, someone is going to pick up on that, and that's the kind of little fine details that you don't want people picking up on, because it just shows that you haven't really been paying attention to your morphs, and that to me just says that you don't really care, which isn't necessarily something that you want being put out there. You know, you want people to think that you actually give a crap about the quality of your product, you know. Okay, so now we're going to have to roll the foot a little bit. still hovering above the floor a little bit too much, so we're just going to bend that a little bit less again. Come back by probably that much. That'll probably do it. And then we select that and we can increase the bend a bit more there. And then the back foot is like horrendously sunk into the floor. So we're going to just bring this back up and see how much of an adjustment we need to make to the shin, which, as you can see, is going to be a reasonably big adjustment. So we'll bring that back, and then there you go, that's much better. And then, as you can see, the sole of the floor is still resting, so we're going to have to do a bit side to side on here as well. Let's just see, side to side with a little bit less twist. That's cool, right? So that's her more or less where we want her to be. We're going to fix her head. Once we've actually got Jake into position, Jake's going to be standing, leaning against the wall perhaps, or maybe standing in the doorway. There is actually quite a lot more room in here than I thought there was, so perhaps I'll have him sitting in the doorway instead, and then they can have a conversation, and there will at least be some light on the subjects when they're having that conversation. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to skip ahead till when I've got Jake in a pose, because I'm aware that this is taking a fairly long time, because I'm going to have to show you the minor adjustments that I make to him afterwards, so bear with me. So we got Jake into a reasonable position there, fairly happy with the pose. Now we just need to fine tune those details, like sorting the feet out, checking the forearms aren't clipping too much onto the knees, and obviously making sure that the hands aren't clipping weirdly on each other as well, which actually they're not at the moment, although as you can see, we are going to have to do an edit, figure, a rigging, and adjust rigging to shape, because there's some seriously weird stuff going on there with his fingers. As you can see, Dash Studio being as reliable as always, and now we've got some weird clipping where in the forearms and other such places we can actually rotate the camera around a bit more, and that may have actually, yeah, it has, that's actually fixed his feet being above the floor, which is good. So we can lower him down a bit more now. Actually going to do a side to side perhaps on his feet, and a little bit of a twist. There we go, so that's more parallel to the floor. And then let's rotate this, and again that's going to need a little bit of a twist and a little bit of a side to the side. There we go, and then that just brings the feet more parallel to the floor, so that when we bring him down a few more millimeters, you can see, there we go, it looks a bit more like his feet are where they're supposed to be. His bum's kind of sinking into the floor, which is fine. Now we've got to fix this business here. His elbows are, well, they're not where they're meant to be. So we'll have a look at the front, back, and the bend. So we need to bring both of those, and then perhaps a little bit of twist. It's just kind of tweaking everything at this point, because this hand ideally wants to meet with the other hand again. So we need to make sure that we get all of these properties more or less where they need to be. There is no easy way to do this, unfortunately. Something along those lines, and then we have to maybe increase the twist a bit. That'll probably work. We might have to just drag it in the scene afterwards if we can, but the drag is playing up a little bit, as you can see. Like, where the hell did that come from? Like, not even vaguely close to where I was moving the mouse. That's just idiotic. So yeah, Dash Studio, as always, being reliable. So here we have to go again. A little bit less of a twist, maybe could bring it back a smidge more. And maybe we have to just tweak this one again. So a little bit more front and back there. It's only slightly out now, but his forearms are more or less where they need to be. But yeah, we still need to tweak this. So we actually need to move his forearm this way, so bend it slightly less. And then bring this forward again, a little bit more to the front. A little bit less of a bend again. There we go, close enough. And then we just have to double check that his thumb is clipping, isn't it? What a son of a beasting. Right, so we're going to have to just make some changes there, up and down, so that it's not actually wrapped around his wrist, but it's, you know, still a passable pose. It's fairly natural looking. Clothes aren't clipping. I'm pretty happy with that in terms of that. So now what we can do is we can bring our third character into the scene. She's only going to be a lump underneath a blanket because she's going to be fully wrapped up and poorly, for those of you who are aware of the storyline. So we're going to bring her in, and then we're going to lay a blanket over her. We're going to drape the blanket using D-Force, and then we're actually going to hide that character in every way apart from maybe the head. We'll have a look at how he looks afterwards. So I'm just going to load that character in, and then I'll be right back. Alrighty, so here we go. We've got Sarah into our scene. So I'm just going to give her a nice casual sleeping or laying down pose. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, we've got some laying down poses. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create the blanket, and rather than creating a square that's going to clip on anybody, what I'm going to do is I am going to create a square, but it's going to be 1.5 meters across, and it's going to have about 200 divisions. I'm just going to hit accept, and then we're going to select that plane, and we're going to drag it up like so. With that selected, I'm going to go to the geometry editing tool like so. I'm going to switch my view mode to wire shaded like so. Then I'm going to come up to above, click on top, make sure that I'm directly above the blanket, and hopefully, I don't know what's going on there. Oh, right, that'll be why. Silly me. The easiest thing to do, of course. Let's just bring it out of the hut. So let's go up to like 400. There we go, and now we can focus in on that object, come back a little bit, and what we're going to do is we're going to change our selection mode to marquee selection, and we're just going to select half of this blanket. We maybe need to go directly to top view so that we're absolutely perfectly perpendicular, and then we can select half of that. Then we're going to right click, geometry editing, give it a second to kick in. Delete selected polygons, yes. And now we've got a rectangular blanket rather than a square one. So now we can go back to perspective view, and we can come back out of wire shaded mode. So we'll go to texture shaded mode, select our move tool. Now we can drop this down back into our hut. Make sure it's just above our character. And then we can rotate it along the y-axis, sort of put it at roughly the same angle as her. Bring it across so that it's above her. Change our view a little bit so that we're above. I just want to make sure that it's if any part of her is sticking out, I want it to be her head, not her feet or arms or anything like that. That looks fairly close to where we need it to be. I'm going to go with that. And now all we need to do is we're going to, while we've got our plane selected, create, and then we're going to say, edit, object, geometry, add D-Force modifier, dynamic surface, and then we should just be able to do a simulation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch off in my simulation settings, start from memorize pose, because I don't want these lots standing up and messing up all of our hard work. What I am going to do is hit start simulate and see what happens. Hopefully the blanket will drop down without too much of a problem. There are a few D-Force items in this. Alrighty, so now we've got our blanket draped over our character. There is a little bit of, you can see the polygons are a little bit weird there. So what I might do is create a sub D. I could swap around the direction of the vertices in this, or the direction of the triangle, so that it doesn't do it quite so much. But to be honest, she's not going to be a major feature in any of the images, so it's more a case of just making sure that it's clear that it's a blanket. So what I'm going to do now is, with the blanket plane selected, I'm going to go into my content library, and I'm just going to look for some kind of material that I can apply to this blanket, and there are a number of options. Now I don't know, some of these are UV materials, so they're not going to respond well to this, but there's probably somewhere in my extensive library some kind of cloth, and worst case scenario is I can go into my shader presets. I've got a bucket load of cloth presets, so it's just finding the right one. Ragged fabrics is probably a good place to start, so we can go with maybe something along the lines of that, maybe. And make sure we've got the surface selected as well, otherwise that's not going to play ball. There we go. And that actually looks pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, for what we're doing, it's fine. Okay, so the final thing, the final piece of the puzzle is the lighting. Now, obviously, outside, there's nothing at the moment. So I am actually wanting to overexpose the background so that the detail isn't too much. But I am still going to have to put some kind of beach HDRI in. So I'm going to go into my render settings. And we're actually going to have to... Let's just jump into NVIDIA Iray mode and see what we've got currently. So now that we've got that loaded, we can see it's still pretty dark and dingy inside there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to browse into HDRIs. And I know I've got a couple of beach HDRIs. They're morning ones, so we are going to have to bump up the exposure on them a little bit, or bump up the intensity. But as you can see, when we look out of the back of the HDRI now, it's at least going to look like a beach. So if we come inside, let's go inside our hut. And once we're inside, we can look out the window. And we can see, oops, no we can't. There we go. We can see that it's overexposed, which is what we're after. But if we were to turn down the exposure accidentally, what we'd see is that there's a beach out there, which is great. But inside is very dark, and the lighting is kind of flat. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to create another plane. This time it's going to be a smaller plane, so we can actually come back to our texture shaded mode for a minute. I can create a small plane, 1.5 meters. This one only needs one division. And I'm going to adjust the level of it to put it up to about 3 meters. And I should put it in the ceiling of our, yeah, there you go. It's in the ceiling, just slightly clipping on the roof. So what I can do is I can actually drop that down ever so slightly, like so. And then that's going to be our main light source for this scene. It's going to be our fill light. It's not going to be very bright because we don't want it to make it look unrealistic, because this beach hut hasn't obviously got any kind of light source inside it. We just want it to lift out the shadows and speed up the render time slightly. So we're going to go into our surfaces tab, go into our emission property, and we're going to just change this to a straight white. We want it to be completely neutral, and we're going to change this to KCDMR of 2, and we're going to change that to probably about 200 for now. Now what I want to do is I'm going to put a camera in the scene over Jake's shoulder looking at Lucy, because she's in the darkest part of the cabin. So we want to test the exposure for her, like so. And I know that the frame is currently square. I will fix that when it comes to actually doing the main render. But for now, I'm going to pop a camera where we are by hitting the camera button there. And it's going to take a second, but that's fine. And then we can apply active viewport transforms like so. And then we can apply a depth of field to our camera as well. Just keep everything looking good. Bit of depth of field there. And then we come back into perspective view, and we're going to get a side-on view of Lucy. And then we're just going to adjust our focal distance so that it's actually focused on her. Like that. And then we can actually bring that down so that it's a little bit narrower, and just make sure that her face is definitely in shot, which it is, which is nice. And then let's change our frame. So go into general, change my resolution to full, yeah, let's go for quad. There we go. That works for me. And then we'll come into our camera like so. And now we can zoom in a little bit. And then pull up our camera just a smidge, like so. And then just double check on that again, because that's obviously massively narrowed down our focal range. But yeah, that's still focused on her face. So back to the camera again. Then we're going to jump into NVIDIA Iray preview mode and see what we can see. But before I do that, I'm actually going to hide Sarah, because as you can see, she's not visible in this shot, so she doesn't need to be in there. All it's doing, if we leave her in the shot, is giving the render engine more geometry to think about, and it's going to massively slow us down. So there we go. She's hidden from view. Stick on NVIDIA Iray preview mode and then let it do some thinking. And then we can see that the lighting inside the hut is okay. Probably still a little bit bright. I want it to be more clear that the major light source is the actual doorway. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop the f-stop back to probably about f8. And then I'm going to take our plane here, and I'm going to go to my surfaces. And I'm actually going to drop this down to about 50. That's a bit better. And then I'm actually going to turn up the power of the HDRI. Once again, going into my environment settings, I'm actually going to change that to about 10. Changes up the intensity, so it's still not quite blowing out Jake, but it's very clear now that the light source is coming from the door. Now, there is a drawback to doing it this way, and that is because the camera is outside in the light source, we now get this horrendous kind of specularity to the character that makes it look like it was taken with a handy cam, and it's really not an attractive look. So what I'm actually thinking of doing is moving the camera inside the hut so that it's not part of the light source, and that will get rid of this horrible headlamp look. But we kind of still want shots of Jake in there as well. So what I'm thinking of doing is adding another camera in the scene. So if I come into perspective view there, as you can see from in here, you can see the shots look a lot more attractive because the camera isn't in the light source. So what I'm thinking of doing is putting one camera just about here, and then we'll spin it around until we're actually pointed at Lucy, wherever she may be. No, I've done a full 360 there. There we go. As you can see, it looks a lot more attractive when the light source isn't adjacent or rather behind the camera. So I'm just going to drop this camera right down so that it's kind of more level with her face. There we go. Probably a bit too much. And I'm thinking actually over in this corner it doesn't really suit because this is a weird angle. So I'm actually going to move over into the other corner, the opposite corner, the one that Jake's it kind of in. There we go. Spin around, I can see exactly where I am so that I can get this more or less dead on. Right now, if we spin it around like so. Again, difficult shot to compose this because, as I say, the lighting isn't particularly attractive when the camera is behind the light source. So what I might do, actually thinking about it, is come back into the camera, and I'm actually going to pull way back, like a long way back. Kind of here perhaps. Rotate my camera down a smidge, and then I'm going to, while I've got the camera selected, I'm going to zoom right in again. And the reason I'm doing this is so that now the viewer can see the frame of the door as well as Jake sitting there. And it just means that it's adding some context so that the player can see why the light source is the way it is, and it takes away some of that horrible ickiness of the lighting. Now what I also need to do is I need to obviously dramatically change the f-stop because we're now so far away that it's making it look like she's just looking at some kind of blob, and we want Jake to be vaguely recognizable in the position that he's in. So I'm going to try going to f22. That's a lot better. There you go. So now we can get them to look at each other. So if I select Lucy and I select Jake, and then I go into my content library and find the look at me script rather than doing it all manually, which is fair enough, but might as well use the scripts that we've got. And there we go. And we just hit accept, it's fine. Happy days. Now the only thing we've got left really to do is to give her a sad expression. So we're going to go into our smart content and make sure that we've only got Lucy selected and not trying to rename her. And we're just going to give her a slightly sad expression. So into our poses, expressions, and then let's see what we've got. Shouldn't be too hard to find something a little bit sad. Got plenty of them. Plenty of them. In fact, I think I found exactly the expression that I'm after. And then all we have to do is we're going to have to switch our optimization to speed because as you can see there's black rings in her eyes, or maybe you didn't see, but there are. I'm looking at them right now. Into render settings, we're going to go and change in our optimization, instancing optimization to speed. Give it a chance to have a bit of a think. And then the black rings in her eyes are gone, but now we're seeing a little bit of poke through on her forehead from her hair cap. So we're going to go into the hair and into actor, and we're going to make some adjustments. I'm actually going to change this Forehead width, I'm going to leave at 1. Forehead depth, I'm actually going to change to 3. No, not 33, just 3. And then head size can stay at 2, and then that should give us what we're looking for. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit the render button. So thanks ever so much for watching that, guys. I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you are interested in supporting the channel, links down below as well. I'll see you in the next one, but until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, alright? Bye-bye.